Welcome back, folks. I'm Frizz, and today I'd like to talk about party sizes. Pathfinder 2e assumes that you're going to be playing with a group of 4 PCs, which means that, for the most part, the game runs the smoothest when you've got 4 PCs. I know that's shocking. All of the math behind building encounters and giving out loot assumes that there are going to be 4 player characters there, but that doesn't mean that you can't play with more or less players. As with many possible situations, Pathfinder 2e has rules for these situations, but those rules don't actually cover literally everything. Now, to be clear, what I'm talking about is the mechanical considerations that game masters and players should make when they're playing with a non-standard party size. Not what party size is best. What party size works best is gonna be different for every table, and it's up to each table to figure that out. I've personally found the most success with 4 players, but I've also had games with 3 or 5 or maybe even one with 6 players that were also really excellent. Generally, having fewer players means that each PC can get a bit more time in the spotlight, but that doesn't necessarily have to be true, since there isn't a rule or anything mandating that every PC has the same hours of quote-unquote screen time, especially during different parts of the story that are specifically related to one PC. Basically, how much fun you're going to have with different numbers of players is dependent on the table. We're just talking about rules here. With that out of the way, let's talk about Paizo's recommendations for different sized parties. The main 2 elements that Paizo draws attention to are treasure and encounter design. The adjustments to treasure aren't really anything special, simply increase the amount of treasure by a certain amount depending on how many extra PCs there are, so that nobody loses out and can't afford stuff for their character. If you've got less PCs than normal, then you reduce the treasure instead. Importantly though, I'd generally recommend reducing treasure by a smaller amount than what they recommend, because having additional money can help make up for the lack of flexibility that will always come with having a smaller party. Paizo does mention this in passing, but I want to call it out explicitly because it really shouldn't be overlooked, and money can cover a lot of holes that are going to exist otherwise within a small party. For combat encounters, the process is similar. For each PC above or below 4, you increase or reduce your XP budget for every encounter. Importantly, this doesn't actually adjust how much XP an encounter is actually going to give. A moderate encounter that would be normally worth around 80 XP is still only worth 80 XP, even if it had a budget of 100 XP due to there being 5 players instead of 4. One important thing that I would really like to make explicitly clear is that while it can be tempting to just add the elite template to a creature to make up that XP difference, that can massively increase the lethality of a combat. Like, seriously. If a monster that would already be challenging is given the elite template, it is going to increase the danger of the combat way more than is reasonable just for having 1 or 2 extra PCs. Now let's move on from Paizo's general recommendations to my general recommendation. And that is that flexibility across the party is always important in Pathfinder 2e, but it's made more important depending on your party size. If you're planning on specializing in one particular thing, how many people are going to be with you is going to dramatically adjust the approach that I would recommend. Think about it this way. If 2 members of a 6-person party are specializing in dealing large amounts of precision damage, that means that only 1/3 of the party is quote-unquote countered whenever you fight an ooze or a ghost that, don't take precision damage. If 2 PCs in a 3-person party are specialized in dealing large amounts of precision damage, then a full 2/3 are countered. It is much easier to hyper-specialize in a larger party without having to deal with the ramifications of not having flexibility. So, really, I would recommend against hyper-specializing in a smaller party unless you're willing to suffer the consequences. Another way of looking at this is that there are certain roles in 2e that are assumed to be filled. These aren't explicitly written out or anything, but generally the game is going to expect that you can heal up outside of combat, take hits in combat, and give hits in combat. In larger parties, it's easier to hyper-specialize into doing one of those roles really, really well. But in smaller parties, often you have to sacrifice specializing in one role so that you can cover another one, just because there aren't enough people to specialize in all of them. Party size is a complicated problem, mainly because there isn't an objectively correct answer, and really the problem itself isn't particularly clear. A lot of the responsibility does fall on GMs, but that doesn't mean by any means that players also don't have to put in the work, especially if the party is smaller than normal. And of course, this isn't even getting into the discussion of what number of players at the table is even the most fun. Well, the one recommendation I can give for that is to just talk to your damn table. Who knew that open communication is useful or something? Thanks for watching. What are your experiences with odd party sizes, and what sizes have actually worked well for you? Let me know in a comment down below, and while you're down there, you can always consider subscribing or joining up as a member or something. My channel members really support me a ton and help me keep making these. Regardless, until I see you next, live a wonderful life.